Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Disturbingly Interesting. My name is Megan, and this is day 5, I believe, of these daily lives at lunch. Trying some new stuff. You guys saw the start streaming kind of graphic there. I'm just trying to figure out how to get that stuff to work. So I guess we'll see. But we'll see if it actually worked or not. Anyway, today's story is really awesome. You guys are going to love it. It is about the Dyatlov Pass, which is probably one of my favorite mysteries ever. So I am going to do a better job about watching the chat. Vicky, I am sorry I didn't see you in there yesterday. I am just not used to looking over and looking at that. So I'm going to be cognizant and make sure I look. But for now, let's get started with something fun. Well, I mean, something cool. I guess it's not really fun, but anyway. So, some mysteries, they fade with time, but the Dyatlov Pass incident did the exact opposite. So in 1959, 9 experienced hikers died under circumstances so strange and bizarre that even Russian investigators struggled to explain it. Their tent was cut open from the inside and their bodies were found scattered across the frozen mountain. Some of them have died of hypothermia, while others had devastating injuries that didn't match anything the investigators could have expected at that time. The official report listed the cause of death as an unknown compelling force. And for over half of a century, that explanation has left people with far more questions than answers. But in 2020, with the help of some unexpected modern technology, some people believe the mystery may have finally been solved. But others, they're not so sure. So tonight, my goodness. Today at lunch here, we're going to take a closer look at the evidence, the theories, and the strange details behind one of the most enduring mysteries in history and find out what makes the Dyatlov Pass incident so disturbingly interesting. So really, the story begins in the winter of 1959 when this group of Russian students, it was students and former students from Ural Polytechnic Institute, or UPI, they set out on a skiing and hiking expedition through the remote Ural mountain range in Russia. So, slides, here we go. So these weren't just anybody. This wasn't just any group. They were not weekend hiking enthusiasts. This was a team of highly experienced outdoorsmen and women. They were trained, they were capable, and most importantly, they were very prepared. So the group included Zina Kolomogorova, Ludmila Dubanina, Alexander Kolevatov, Rustam Slobodin, Igor Dyatlov, Alexander or Sasha Zolotaryov, Nikolay Thibault Brinail, Yuri Doroshenko, Yuri Krabanashenko, and Yuri Yurdin. So you probably may have noticed that that's actually 10 people, not 9. And you would be correct. So Yuri Yurdin was originally part of the group, but just after the trip started, he started experiencing a flare-up from his rheumatism, which was causing him severe back and leg pain. And knowing that he would most likely not be able to complete the expedition and that he was probably going to slow his friends down, Yuri made the decision to call it quits and return home. And that decision would ultimately save his life because Yuri would become the only survivor. So the expedition was led by, good Lord, I'm not doing the right thing today, Igor Dyatlov. He was 23 years old. He was an engineering student from UPI. And despite his young age, everyone who knew him said he was the right person for the job. They described him as disciplined, methodical, and extremely capable. And this trip wasn't a spontaneous one. They had been planning and preparing meticulously for weeks. The hikers were attempting to earn their grade 3 hiking certification, which was the highest level available to them at the time. And in order to qualify, the expedition had to meet specific criteria. So it had to cover at least 300 kilometers. they had to travel through extremely difficult terrain, spend at least 16 days in the wilderness, and spend half of those nights camping in tents. And if they were successful, they would become master level hikers, and then they would be qualified to teach others. So the first few days, everything was fine. Everything seemed normal. The hikers, they documented their journey through... Vicky! Hello, good morning, how are you? Oh, it's good to see you. I mentioned at the beginning that I had to be better at making sure I was paying attention because I missed you in the chat yesterday, and I'm not going to do that today. So I'll make sure I keep an eye on it. We're talking about the Dyatlov Pass incident, and was just getting into the start of their journey into the mountain. In the first few days that the group left, everything was normal. They were documenting their journey. They were photographing everything, writing stuff in their diaries. They were joking and laughing. They even sang songs as they traveled through this, pretty rough terrain in the deep snow. They were in great spirits, even though it was starting to get increasingly more difficult. And on January 31st, the group was nearing the part of the trip where they would need to start heading up the Otorten Mountain, is what it's called. Can you not see the video? Well, let me know. I'm about ready to head over to the slides. We're going to move over to the hike. Because this was going to be such a demanding ascent up the mountain, they needed to build a temporary cache to hold all their extra gear, their food, and their clothes. It was to help lighten the load. They wanted to be as light as possible, and then they would pick it all up on their way back. But as the day progressed, Igor, he had written in his diary that the weather started to turn bad, and it was taking longer than they had originally expected. No, you're not able to see the video. Interesting. Can you see the slides? Well, I am sure. I am sure that I messed something up on my... Oh, now you can. Okay, I was going to say, I am sure that if you can't, it's because I messed something up on my end. But I'm glad it's working now. Thank you so much. So, as the day had progressed on, Igor had written in his diary that the weather was starting to turn really bad, and it was taking longer than they had originally expected. Hey, Kathy. Happy Wednesday to you both. Good to see you guys. I'm talking about the Dyatlov Pass incident because this happens to be like one of my favorite mysteries, I guess you could say, in history of all time. So we are at the part now where the group has started to make their way up there. It's kind of getting towards the end of the trip. They're trying to go up the mountain, and they dropped off a bunch of cache of a bunch of their gear, their extra gear, so they would lighten the load on the way up the mountain. The picture on the screen is actually the last picture that they took on their way there. So you can see the weather was getting bad and it was getting dark. So the group decided that it would be best to just stop and set up camp for the night so they didn't get caught up in the weather and in the dark. They were in this open area on the slope of Holachel Mountain, and Igor decided that it was the spot that they were going to make camp. And it wasn't the most ideal spot for sure, but they assessed the situation, and there wasn't enough of a slope to worry about an avalanche. And, it was right above the timberline, so it was pretty exposed to the elements. Oh, yeah, this is a good one. So it was exposed to the elements, and it wasn't the most ideal spot, but that's what they came for, right? Like, they weren't there to have a relaxing vacation. They were there to get that grade 3 certification. And the bonus part to this spot, the silver lining, if you will, was that even though they couldn't see it through the blowing snow and the darkness at night, when they woke up in the morning, or when they would wake up in the morning, they were in direct line of sight of their goal. So they would have this amazing accomplishment and a testimony to their skill and endurance. But none of them would live through the night to see it. I gotta find better buttons for this. Okay, so the hikers planned to be gone for several weeks. So when they didn't show up on their expected return day of February 13th, nobody immediately panicked. Right? This was 1959. There were no cell phones or like satellite trackers or anything, and delays during weather expeditions were common. But when 3 more days passed and there was still no sign of the group, the families began to worry. But no one at the university really seemed to want to do anything, and it wasn't until February 17th that the families of the hikers actually pressured UPI enough that they organized a search party and began to look for the missing hikers. So on February 26th, the team discovered the hikers' camp, the one that they had set up the night before on January 31st on that eastern slope of Halachal Mountain. And this is where everything starts to get really weird. So the tent had collapsed under the snow, and inside they found something really strange. All of the hikers' gear was still there. It was neatly folded and stacked in its place. There's stuff like their boots and their coats, their food, their camera, their diaries. It looked at first to the searchers as though the group had really just got up and walked away. But then the investigators noticed something else. The sides of the tent had been cut open with a knife. It's really alarming because now they're thinking that someone or a group of someone's had ambushed the hikers and tried to abduct them. And later that experts would determine that the cuts had actually been made from inside the tent, and they were cut in different sizes. So some were short and some were long. They were at different depths, some barely cut into the fabric at all. So really the expert concluded that whoever had made the cuts had been trying to escape the tent in a hurry, which is creepy. But it gets better. On the outside of the tent, investigators, they found 9 sets of footprints, all leading away from the tent and down the slope toward a grove of cedar trees. The prints told a really disturbing story. So the investigators noted that based off of the impressions, one person appeared to be wearing boots, and the others were either in socks or completely barefoot. And again, this is the Russian wilderness in February, and temperatures were estimated to be minus 30 degrees Fahrenheit with 40 mile an hour per winds. I'm from North Dakota, and that it does sound like our January weather, and it's cold. You want boots on for sure. The other really creepy thing about the tracks is that they weren't running. They were walking away from the tent. So walking away from the tent down the slope to the cedar trees. On February 27th, researchers were about a mile down the slope from the tent, near that large group of cedar trees, when they discovered the remains of a small crude fire that had been made from the low-hanging and easy-to-reach branches of one of the cedar trees. Nearby that, they found the first 2 bodies. It was the body of Yuri Doroshenko and Yuri Krivonashenko. Both men had very little clothing on for the environment, and they both had scratches and abrasions all on their hands, their arms, their shins. They looked like they had been climbing the trees, and it seemed obvious that both of the men had died of hypothermia. Doroshenko, he had internal injuries that would be consistent with a crushing blow to the chest or something very heavy pressing on his chest for an extended period of time. Yuri Krivonashenko's body was covered in bruises and abrasions, but he also had a piece of his skin in his teeth, and they determined that the skin in his teeth was actually from his knuckles. Yes, it is a very strange story. The skin in his teeth was actually from his knuckles, and they determined that that could suggest that maybe he was trying to keep himself awake by biting his knuckles so they wouldn't die of hypothermia, or it could suggest that maybe he was trying to keep himself quiet or to stifle a cry. Igor, Zina, and Rustam were both found that same day, Igor had 2 pairs of pants on, but no shoes. Zena was wearing 2 hats, 2 sweaters, 3 pairs of pants, and 2 socks, but both socks were on 1 foot. Rustam had 2 pairs of pants on, a sweater, 4 pairs of socks, and 1 boot. So it was really, really strange the way that they were all dressed, or not dressed. It was very, 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 very strange. So the searchers were actually unable to find any trace of the other hikers until several months later in May, when the snow started to melt. About 50 meters away from the cedar trees, the bodies of the remaining 4 hikers were found in what has become known as the Dyatlov Den. So the den was down in a ravine next to a stream, and it was made by the hikers. And it was made by digging out the snow and placing branches on the ground to reduce contact with the cold snow. So they weren't sitting directly on it. They were sitting on these branches. Ludmila was found wearing Krivonoshenko's sweater and pants, and she was also found on her knees, bent over a rock face down in the stream. The bodies of Alexander Kolevatov and Alexander Zolotaryov were both found in like an embrace, like they had died trying to keep each other warm. And then not too far from them was the body of Nikolai. So all of the hikers obviously showed signs of hypothermia and frostbite, but 6 of the 9 hikers had significant crushing damage to their bones. So the medical examiners compared the extent of the damage to what you might see from someone who was hit by a speeding car. Rustam had skull fractures on both sides of his head that were consistent with blunt force trauma. Ludmila, she had 10 broken ribs and was missing her tongue. The medical examiner noted that her tongue, as well as the muscle that attaches the tongue to the mouth, had been removed. There was also notes of some coagulated blood, which could suggest that she was alive when it happened. And she also had extensive damage to her chest, so her broken ribs had pierced her artery, which is what killed her. Wonder if they would put the coordinates in Google Earth for that date, if they would find anything, or if they would show anything. I don't know. I suppose it would to have a set. I don't know. That would be kind of crazy. It was a long time ago, so it might not. Oh yeah. Okay. So Zolotaryov, his eyeballs were missing, and his chest was crushed. And Nikolai, his skull was crushed on both sides from blunt force trauma, but there was no damage to the front or back of his skull. So what they had suggested was if he was to have fallen down the ravine, just the way that a human body falls, there would have been damage to all sides of the head, not just the side, not just either side. So they likened it to him being forcefully thrown, potentially. All of the bodies had similar wounds. As far as the fractures and the broken bones go, they were all different enough that the medical examiner concluded at the time that it was more than likely not one single event that damaged everybody, but several different events, which is also crazy to think about. But eventually, the investigators ruled the cause of death as hypothermia, and then an unknown compelling force, and the case was closed only a few weeks later on May 28th. And there's several really strange details that remain in addition to those strange details, and I left out a lot of the details regarding the bodies. It's pretty gruesome, and you can, if you were so inclined, you could go online and look. It is very interesting, but I don't really want to retell it. But if that wasn't enough, there's more. So another group of hikers, in the beginning of February, they had claimed to see fireballs in the sky. There was no explanation for it. They said they were out, it was getting dark, and they could see these fireballs shooting across the sky. I think it was like February 14th-ish. one of the bodies of the hikers was discovered with a notepad in one hand and a pencil in the other, but they said there was nothing written on it, and then it just got lost afterwards. And then there's no mention of it anywhere. It was just gone. Some of the bodies were reported to have a small amount of radiation. And actually, there is a radiogram from the helicopter pilots because they were refusing to take the bodies unless they were put in a special casket. So the commanding officer actually had to pull a gun on the helicopter pilots and force them to take the bodies. And the craziest part about all of this is that this is all documented. Like, it's all documented in these radiograms, which are like, I don't know, very old school text messages back and forth. And they're telling people like what they're seeing, and they've taken pictures of everything. It was very, very, very strange. So, and then in addition to all of that, so they did force everybody to take it away. And then shortly after the second group of bodies was found, the lead investigator was told by someone to shut it down and to close the case and do not pursue it any further. And then the whole area was closed to the public for years after the bodies were found, which is super, super strange, but leads us to some theories. Sorry if you guys could hear that stuff upstairs. My kid, I'm not gonna, don't worry, Vicky, I'm not gonna go into the graphic stuff. I don't know. That kind of stuff, while I don't mind watching stuff on it, I don't really want to talk about it in videos because I don't know. I don't want to be disrespectful to people who have passed away. But yeah, it is pretty gross. Anyway, so if you can hear my kid upstairs, they just got home, they're not feeling well. But let's talk about some theories, which is one of the other coolest parts about this. So the scene itself, right? The lack of witnesses, all the secrecy, the bodies, it has really ignited this myriad of different theories and possibilities over the years of what could possibly have happened to these hikers. Some of these theories are way crazier than others, but it starts with the government. So one of the main theories is that maybe there was some type of secret testing or an operation going on that the group mistakenly walked right into. Another group of theories that it could be was maybe it was other people or peoples. Initially, they thought it might be escaped prisoners because, again, of the damage to the tent. Or the Mansi tribe, which is the native tribe in the area. The investigators thought maybe that they could have attacked the hikers. The problem with that is that the Mansi tribe just historically is known as being a very peaceful tribe, and they're very helpful. The other kind of category of theories, which is obviously the one that I subscribe to the most, is the paranormal ones, stuff like UFOs and Bigfoot. The last photo, as you can see there, the last photo that was ever taken was of this octagon-shaped object. This was found on one of the hikers' cameras, and it has this other light next to it. So nobody really knows what it is. There are some experts that say it's UFOs, it's unexplainable, and then there's other experts that say it's part of the camera lens, which very well could be that old camera like that. But it's crazy that that's the last photo taken, right? There's other like groups of theories that it could be, which are all natural. One of them is ball lightning, which I know what ball lightning is. I just don't know how it would be the cause of all of this. It definitely could be maybe what the hikers saw when they saw fireballs in the sky. Maybe it was ball lightning, but I don't know how ball lightning could be responsible for this. You can take that with a grain of salt because I'm not an expert, but it seems weird to me. Another one is animals, obviously. A lot of the damage to the bodies could be related to, especially a lot of the superficial stuff, could be related to scavenging animals at the time, or any animals in the area. Another very interesting, I read a book called Dead Mountain by Donnie Eicher, and it was a guy who studied this case for 5 years and then actually went to Dyatlov Pass and when interviewed a bunch of people. He believes, or in his book, he was talking about the theory of infrasound, which I had not heard before up until this. So apparently the way that the mountain, like the slope of the mountain, the slope of the top of the mountain, it makes a dome. And under the perfect conditions, when the wind is going really fast over that dome, and then the way it like swirls down the mountain, it can create infrasound, which is a level of sound that you can't hear, but it does like affect you physically and mentally and emotionally. And that stuff is true. Like, we know that infrasound can do that to the human body. In fact, the US government uses infrasound as a weapon to like less violently detain people because it will stop you. It'll stop you in your tracks because it disorients you. It can make you feel sick, and it's very uncomfortable. So the theory with that is that because it was so windy and so crappy that night, that the conditions just happened to be perfect, infrasound came rushing in, disoriented the hikers, made them very paranoid and panicked to the point where they would leave not dressed appropriately and run out into the woods. And then by the time they got far enough away from it and was able to come kind of out of that daze, they were too far away from the tent to be able to make it back in time. Which, I don't know, I do think that is a good one. But the theory that I guess is the official theory now of what happened is an avalanche. So let's talk about the avalanche theory. Because in 2020, Russia declared the avalanche as the official cause of death of the 9 hikers. And then later that same year, a group of Swiss scientists, they used a software program that was actually used in Disney's Frozen movie. And the producers or the designers in the movies used this software to create snow and blizzard conditions. And these scientists used that software to recreate what they think happened or what could have happened. And they believe what most likely killed the hikers was a type of avalanche called a slab avalanche, which I had to look up. And the difference between a slab avalanche and a regular avalanche is kind of exactly like it sounds. Like, it's a giant piece of ice and snow that kind of slides down instead of the like ball of snow that comes down. And that has been, again, the theory. Everybody kind of feels like it is still a theory. Obviously, they can't prove that that's what happened. But the problem with that is that during the initial search and rescue, they did question whether it was an avalanche or whether it was weather related, but they ruled it out because they didn't see any signs, and because of how neatly everything was still in the tent. And the picture of the tent that they have, like the famous picture of the tent, the searchers outside the tent, when you see it, the ski poles and the skis are still standing upright in the snow. Like, the hikers got out, put them in the snow, and then went to bed. They're still standing there. So if you think if it was an avalanche that was powerful enough to do that amount of damage to a human body, like, I feel like it would have knocked the skis over. But again, I'm not an expert. But it does raise the question, was it really an avalanche? So we're going to go back to Yuri Yurdin. So after graduating from UPI, Yuri Yurdin, he moved to Solomisk, where he would eventually become the deputy head of economics. And while he did try to move on with his life, he was kind of tormented by survivor's guilt, like on top of the loss of his friends in such a horrific and public way. He really tried to lay low and not become the center of attention for all of the mystery and conspiracy theories, not only about the case, but about him as well. So people were questioning whether or not Yuri knew something, and that's why he didn't continue on and why he turned back and said he was having the pain that he couldn't go. So every February, Yuri makes a trip out to the cemetery in Yekaterinburg to visit the graves of his friends. And until his death in 2013 at age 75, Yuri Yurdin maintained his stance that he did not believe his friends were killed by natural causes. He believed that they were victims of powerful weapon testing from the Russian military. And shortly before he passed away, Yuri was telling people that he was in the process of writing a book about the Dyatlov Pass incident. He had locked himself away in his apartment, and when people were getting worried about him and they were knocking, be like, Yuri, what are you doing? And he's like, I'm in the process of writing my book. But if he did write a book about it, it was never found when he died, which is also disturbing. So really, no matter what explanation you believe, no matter what the hikers experienced, or no matter what you think the hikers experienced, really, whatever it was horrifying, right? It doesn't matter if it was natural or Bigfoot or aliens. What they went through was awful. 9 people ran into a frozen wilderness in the middle of the night. And more than 60 years later, we still have no idea why they did that. And that's really what makes the Dyatlov Pass incident so disturbingly interesting, is because I don't know that we will ever know what actually happened to them. Kathy, you are ahead of the game. I was just going to ask you guys what you think happened. So Kathy said, I'm thinking it's for sure more than one person that did all of this, but how was it done without the others knowing? It's a good question, because again, there was 9 of them in there. But how were they wearing the clothes? It is weird and it's random. And I don't know, I think if 9 people go out, even experienced hikers, it does make a difference that they were so experienced, but anybody can make a mistake. Even a group of hikers can make a mistake, but it's very unlikely that 9 very experienced hikers would choose to set up camp in an area that was prone to avalanches or that could have had an avalanche. The other question too is before they continued to that spot, they had dropped a lot of their gear. So remember, they had put that cache down at the bottom of the mountain so that when they came back down, they would have all that extra gear they didn't have to carry on them. None of them went to that. They just went down to the cedar trees. The injuries themselves, could they be explained away by animals? Some of it, yeah. Could it be explained away by them being crushed by an avalanche? The medical examiner said no. The medical examiner at the time said the injuries were all similar in that they were crushing and devastating, but different enough that they couldn't have been done by one single force. And the medical examiner at the time was referring to an avalanche. It couldn't have been one thing that came down. If it was one avalanche that came in and swooped in, then you would think multiple people, if we're all facing one way, then multiple people would have the same type of injury on one. I don't know. It was just, none of it makes any sense. So Vicky, I've seen the aftermath of the avalanche. That was no yeah, I've seen I am also from Alaska too, Vicky. I have seen the aftermath of an avalanche, and from the pictures, because of course we were not there, but from the pictures, it doesn't look like an avalanche. And if it was an avalanche that was big enough to, again, kill 9 people and do that much damage and carry them a mile down, I feel like it would have buried the tent. I feel like it would have knocked the ski poles over. Kathy, I don't think an avalanche would have arranged their clothes. Agreed. Again, if it, an avalanche is a force. You got a force like that coming through. I don't think your sweaters are going to stay neatly piled. And the boots, when they said they went in, their boots were lined up, they had came in and taken them off. I don't know. It is craziness. But again, I think I will always lean a little more paranormal on this one just because of how crazy it is. I like to be somewhat neutral, if I can be, on stuff, but I don't know. This one is one of those ones that is just really, really crazy. Tomorrow, I'm going to be talking about Hinterkaifeck, which is another one of these true crime mysteries that have happened throughout history that is just disturbing. It is a great mystery. You are correct. But that is our story for today. I'm Megan. This is Disturbingly Interesting. If you made it this far, thank you so much for hanging out with me. I really appreciate it. Kathy, Vicky, thank you guys so much. Make sure you hit the like button and subscribe if you want to see more content like this. And if you want to hear about a particular topic, just let me know. I'm more than happy to look at anything. And otherwise, we'll see you back here tomorrow at 12 p.m. Central Time for another disturbing lunch hour. Thank you guys again. Appreciate it.